wait for Ixalan, I decided it's a good time to finally play some Modern. Haven't gotten to play this format in a while, and I'm pretty excited to try out this deck, which has been kind of like slowly putting up results online, or at least a version of it. The one that's doing alright online has a lot of Boros charms, more mutagenic growths, and less interaction. So I wanted to try and merge that list with the old Death Shadow Zoo list, like before Gataxian Probe got banned, and I think that this deck is likely pretty good, at least right now, because I feel like a deck like this should be favored against Grixis Death Shadow and the green-red Scapeshift decks. So it is basically just a more aggressive Death Shadow deck, which I think gives you a pretty solid edge in the mirrors. So you have the same core like Death Shadow, Street Wraith, Thoughtseize, except in this case, instead of playing just like a pile of Disruption, you have things like Monastery Swiftspear, Wild Nacatl, and a pretty big burn plan with Tribal Flames and Lightning Bolts. So the old Death Shadow Zoo decks never really went this far as far as like, you know, being more of like an actual Zoo deck. They were kind of like combo decks where they had Temur Battle Rage become immense. And I think that that's like actually a reasonable way to take the deck too, but I feel like, I don't know, just I kind of want the reach of this deck to be burn based and not necessarily pump spell based, because the format kind of has like a lot of removal right now. So I'd rather just try and play like 3/1 drops, make it so eventually they're going to kill all my creatures, but I want to kind of tax their mana in the early game, get in a bunch of damage, and then be able to finish them off with burn spells. And Thoughtseize doesn't necessarily contribute to this. There are going to be some games where maybe you get to like Thoughtseize, take one of the removal spells, or post-board you take like one of their sweepers or something, and then Thoughtseize actually helps you get in more damage because you're able to protect some creatures. But Thoughtseize might also just be a necessary evil against combo decks, where it just like slows them down by a turn or two, and then that'll allow you to actually finish them off before they get to do their whole combo thing. So I think this deck could probably kill on turn 3. I mean, like any deck with like a triple 1-drop draw and like 3 Lightning Bolts and mutagenic growths and stuff should be able to kill on turn 3, but like most of the time you're aiming for like turn 4, turn 5. And a lot of that has to do with like, well, you know, it's really tough to play Death Shadow on turn 1. So as far as Zoo decks are concerned, like this might be a little bit on the slower end, especially with things like Thoughtseize, but I think that the strength is not necessarily in just trying to be like the fastest, best Zoo deck possible, which is kind of what the Boros Charm lists are aiming to do. I think the upside to this is to make a lot of removal bad with Death Shadow, Tarmogoyf, and to some degree Thoughtseize too, and then just be able to finish them off with burn once they actually stabilize. So the online lists have 4 mutagenic growth, Might of Alara, Boros Charm, and that's like Might of Alara, Boros Charm is kind of like Temur Battle Rage become immense to a certain degree, except like the cards are a little bit better on their own. But instead of those things, I'm playing like the Thoughtseizes, the Fatal Pushes, and the Mishra's Baubles. The other thing that I have that the lists don't have is Renegade Rallier, and I think that this is like one of the big draws for me to actually try and play this archetype, where this gives you like a little bit more of a grindier element, especially against things like Grixis Death Shadow. And again, maybe like the matchup is so good that you don't really need it. I don't know, but I do think that some amount of like grinding element is probably a necessity for a deck like this. The one thing that I am worried about is the mana base. It seems like for the most part, the first list that showed up had a mana base, and then the second person changed it slightly, and then that mana base has just been copied like ad nauseum basically. And to me, that makes me think that the mana base is probably not correct, but we'll find out. These old Zoo decks, and even just like the Death Shadow Zoo decks, used to operate off of Stomping Ground and Godless Shrine. And then for Tribal Flames, you would just fetch like a blue source, which was typically a blue-red source, a Steam Vents, because you would want to play like Lightning Bolt and Tribal Flames to finish the game. So you'd want the blue source to be also another red source. This deck actually does not have Stomping Ground or Godless Shrine in it, which kind of strikes me as odd. I'm willing to believe that Overgrown Tomb Sacred Foundry is probably a better opening pair, but especially for those, excuse me, for those decks, it seemed kind of weird because of Boros Charm. Like, you would want your Boros Charm to be castable with only 2 land, because the deck only had 18 land, but like Overgrown Tomb Sacred Foundry doesn't allow you to do that, so I don't know. It is odd. With this deck, the only gold card that we have is Renegade Rallier, so like Blood Crypt, Temple Garden is a pair that you can open on, and then if you have Steam Vents, you can't actually cast the Rallier on 3. So I think the Temple Garden Blood Crypt pair might be wrong, and it should be Stomping Around Godless Shrine, but we'll see. I don't know. And then like which fetch lands you even play is also kind of weird. Like, I do think that you want the majority of your fetches to be red, if possible, so that you can fetch the Steam Vents. The Moto list also had a breeding pool in here, which I didn't really understand, so I cut that. So now I'm down to only 5 fetchable lands, but I don't think that's really going to affect me all that much. But yeah, that's it for the main deck. One of the reasons I do like the idea of this deck, aside from the fact that it might just be well positioned against the best decks in the format right now, is that like you get a lot of really, really good sideboard cards. So Ancient Grudge is obviously a house against Affinity and things like Lantern. Lingering Souls is a nice grindy card, also very good against Affinity. And then just like the sideboard, like, you know, Rest in Peace, Stony Silence, like the white sideboard cards are just always going to be good. And then the blue splash allows you to have Disdainful Stroke for the Escape Shift decks too, which I like. And Stroke is also good against things like Ad Nauseam. So I do like the fact that the sideboard gives you a lot of flexibility for like what matchups you actually want to target. So I have a couple Grafdigger's Cages for Collected Company and to double as Graveyard Hate against Dredge. I have a Kozilek's Return for Affinity and Collected Company decks. Path to Exile to clear away big things, which is probably relevant in Mirrors and maybe against the Titan Shift decks. I don't know. I feel like if they play a Primeval Titan, you just have to kill them that turn. So pathing their thing probably isn't that relevant. And honestly, there aren't many cards that I want to cut in the matchup either, just like the Fatal Pushes and Ralliers, so I don't know. Third Rallier, considered a fourth one. That was my last cut, and between the Lingering Souls, I think that there are enough grindy elements that maybe you don't need this, and then there's a Forest lurking in the sideboard for decks with Path to Exile. So, we're going to play 3 rounds, hopefully get to see whether or not this deck is actually like the real deal or not. I still don't know when the next Modern tournament I'm going to is, because there haven't been Modern Grand Prix for quite a while, and I'm on the West Coast, so that means very, very limited access to SCG tour stops for me. But I do like this deck a lot. I would like to tune this for the future so that, you know, I have some idea of what I'm going to play in the next Modern tournament. But this is definitely version number 1 and should be treated as such. Would not surprise me if we go into the wrap-up and I'm like, I want to change these 15 cards. So we'll see. But hopefully this deck ends up being as sweet as I think it's going to be.